You're listening to Change Your POV Podcast, episode 30.
I hated the Iraqis. I can't say that I was there, that I was joyed to be there when we started losing people and I had so many people getting injured. Now with the time away from there, I can understand why some of those people, not the militants, did what they did, but fathers trying to get food and water for their kids, electricity. If I was put in the same position as some of them, I would have done no less than they did.
Welcome to Change Your POV Podcast, helping you navigate transitions in your life, like entering and exiting college or the military, changing jobs or careers, and providing you with the coaching and mentorship needed to help you advance in your personal or professional life. Sometimes all you need is to change your point of view. Now, here's your host, Eddie Lazary.
Hello, folks, and welcome to Change Your POV Podcast. I'm your host, Eddie Lazary. In this week's episode, I have an opportunity to speak with a mentor of mine, Sergeant First Class Michael Mault. He is a 22-year veteran who is now retired. Michael was my platoon sergeant when we were both deployed in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom II in March 04 to March 05 in Baghdad, Iraq. Michael served as a mobile training team instructor responsible for teaching combat units in intelligence collection, management, and distribution. He taught combat units analytic skills and software, and much of these trainings were focused in and around the instruction of infantry units on high-value individual targeting practices, procedures, and strategies. After 22 years of active duty as a senior non-commissioned officer, one would think that the transition out of military would be an easy one. However, you will see that transitioning out of military service is challenging for everyone. This challenge spans all branches of service, all rank structures, and regardless of years of service. You are not alone. Michael quickly found something missing from his life upon his separation, as do many of us. He discovered that void to be the lack of community, camaraderie, and a sense of purpose. Sound familiar? The more veterans I have an opportunity to speak with and interview, this seems to be a reoccurring theme. What each veteran does with this gap in their life, however, is very different and can often mean the difference between living a full and satisfying life and having feelings of depression, self-doubt, and even suicide. After looking in several different places for organizations he could participate in, Michael found his community with Team RWB, which stands for Red, White, and Blue. Let's get into this episode with Michael Mault. It's a great one. But before that, let's hear a word from our sponsor, Audible.com. If you like to listen to audiobooks, which I do, I listen to my commute on my way to and from work, while I'm shoveling snow, mowing the grass, or whatever I find myself doing, I am always checking out the latest and greatest of audiobooks and, of course, podcasts. So if you're like me and you don't have a whole lot of time to read, but you've got time to put in a couple of earbuds and just check out a good audiobook, I highly recommend heading over to changeyourpov.com/free book for your free 30-day trial and a free audio download. Head over now and get yours today. All right, let's get right into this interview already in progress. So welcome everyone to yet another episode of Change Your POV Podcast. I'm your host, Eddie Lazary, and today I've got a special guest. He is my former platoon sergeant that I have got a lot of stories with this guy. We served together in 1st Cav Division, hence the hat that I've got on. And if you could see what he's got on, he's got his old Cav shirt, so we're kind of matching. Totally unplanned, of course, but that's the way we roll. So without further ado, this is retired Sergeant First Class Michael Mault. How you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing awesome. I'm just excited to get to talk to you again. I know you're a busy guy. So for the listeners out there, why don't you go through a little bit and tell us about yourself and what you're up to?
Sure. I retired out of the Army after 22 years, 5 Middle East deployments, 3 combat deployments in 2009. Since I retired, I went into government contracting, was contracting for a company that was teaching something called Company Operations Intelligence Support Team, or COIST, out of Fort Huachuca, Arizona, which was teaching military intelligence to combat units that were about to deploy. Not just regular units, but special ops units, different units that were going to Afghanistan, Iraq, or Central Africa. The contracts dried up as the war started to wind down, supposedly. So we moved from Arizona back to Central Texas, where I've known it and lived for a while. And about 2 years ago, because of medical reasons and because of some health reasons, I retired. So I've just been trying to manage issues along the lines of sometimes PTSD or things with some physical activities to get out and about. Some of that's mentoring veterans, which I do now. Veterans that have PTSD, they're looking for a physical training or activity outlook through some bike riding, through some fellowship. In a group called Team RWB. RWB stands for Red, White, and Blue.org. So we're a 501c and not for profit. And I think we're one of the fastest growing vet organizations in the nation right now. Our basic chapter is to help veterans find physical and social activities after they get out of the military. We're not based like the VFW and American Legion, where we're centered around a bar, drinking and smoking. We're based along the lines of doing tough mudders like I've seen you do, half marathons, full marathons, bike rides, or just socialization and walking, or going to the bowling alley, kayaking, or whatever you want to do.
That's awesome. So I really want to get into RWB a little bit more, because it's an organization that I'm unfamiliar with. But before we do, talk to me a little bit about some of these other deployments that you went on after our deployment in 0405.
Sure. After 0405, when we were in central Iraq, or in central Baghdad, when everything seemed to blow up inside our city, came back. I think you got out of the military, and then 1st Cav redeployed in 2006. We had a 15-month rotation from 2006 to 2008. So the joy was spending 2 Christmases in a row in Baghdad. At the time, we had a great guy named Colonel Funk, who was the brigade commander. He's now a General Funk. His philosophy was, if they shoot at us, whether it's indirect from rockets, mortars, or whatever they had, we're going to fire back. And at the time, we took something called a M109 Alpha 6, which is a Paladin artillery piece for those who aren't familiar, and mortars. At the time, we had fired over 5,000 rounds in counterfire, which had set the record at the time. We were surpassed shortly after we left by the next unit. But the unit that we replaced, which will remain unnamed, hadn't fired any rounds in their year before us in counterfire. So the base kept getting hit. I was at Camp Taji, which is a huge base. The base kept getting hit before we took the reins, and there was no immediate pushback. As soon as we started pushing back, we noticed that IEDs and indirect dropped almost not significantly to zero, but it dropped way down. We still had catastrophic events, but not near what we had before.
So your counter indirect, your counter mortars or artillery, was that primarily done through like crater analysis, or did you guys have radar out there?
We had Q36 and Q37 radars set up, and we had a whole pattern set up where we had specific time, under 2 minutes. We would direct it. I would look on our imagery to make sure that there were no private residents there, schools, hospitals, direct lines of power, maybe water lines. We would clear that, get it blessed off, and then we would counterfire to the guns all in under 2 minutes in clearance. Whether that was through observers with eyes on the ground. If we couldn't get observers with eyes on the ground, we'd try to vector in UAV assets. If we didn't have those assets, maybe it was an Air Force asset. At the very least, if it showed that it came from a farm or an area outside, we would fire indirect, maybe a battery 2, a battery 3, just to show them that we knew how to reach out and touch them. These guys got pretty sophisticated. They were using rockets in tubes based in the ground with washing machine timers. So sometimes there wasn't anybody there, and sometimes we probably killed a few cattle. But that was significant. You still see that their tactics, techniques, and procedures to this day are to put things out there in civilian sectors and launch those with the knowledge that if they're going to fire back or counter on that they're going to kill civilians. And you see a lot of that in Israel with Hamas and different things right now.
So for the listeners out there, Michael was talking about firing a battery 2 or battery 3. What that means is there's 6 guns, unless something's changed since I was out, but there's 6 guns to a battery, and battery 2 would mean that every gun would fire 2 rounds. So a battery 2 would essentially be 12 rounds, and battery 3 would be, 6 guns firing 3 rounds and on the way up. So that's a significant amount of firepower that you're dropping. That's essentially all at one time, like a fire for effect type of a thing. So how much, in terms of BDA or battle damage assessment, were you able to, obviously you're deterring them just from the fact that you're firing back, but did you get some good kills in anyway?
We did, and actually one of my awards, we're not going to go into specific numbers, we took out quite a few. It became some units tactic that when they knew there was a roadway that had been heavily IED in place, bombs put in the roadway, whether it's culverts in the road itself, if they didn't have the ability to have the Buffalo or the MRAP come out, different systems to check for these devices, we would run 155 up the road, straight up the road every 50, 100 meters to sort of reduce the risk and maybe hit a cable if it was, remote controlled or if it was cable detonated. And again, we found that it dropped it significantly. I know that we had some catastrophic hits on some enemies multiple times, and we had some catastrophic hits on some vehicles and emplacers. So it was, I don't want to say it's good. It's never good when you end somebody else's existence. But I would always say that before they take one of our soldiers' lives, I would rather take one of their lives. And so,
Amen. So how was that for obvious reasons that you and I know, just the stark contrast in the level and amount of artillery used between the deployment we were in, that I was in with you, and that one. But what else is different about back-to-back deployments or redeployments? Does it get easier? Does it get harder?
I think personally, you and I were there, and you remember the hat that flipped over, and that young driver got crushed underneath it. It was right before we went home. They were following too close. He hit a barrier in the middle of the road or off the side of the traffic pattern interchange, and we watched that young man die basically in front of us. Yep. Several days before he came home, and you remember the words that he said, "I don't want to die, I don't want to die." Absolutely, you become more callous and you make more mistakes because you figure that you know everything. The problem with people that are going back-to-back rotations, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, is that you become almost to the feeling that you're Superman, that you didn't get touched last time, you won't get touched this time. So you get that feeling that you've been there, done that, and you know more than they do. Yet while you rotated back to the States for a year, they had more time to prepare for what you were going to counter on them, as we saw with platter charges in different venues of double-stacked anti-tank mines that they were using to find our Buffaloes that were searching for their IEDs. So low tech always beats out high tech. We spend billions of dollars on these systems to defeat them, and they always seem to come back with a AA battery and a flashlight like MacGyver and defeat our most sophisticated materials. I mean, it's sad, but it's factual.
Yeah. So I know that you and I were there. That was pretty much everyone in our division that we deployed with at the time was pretty much their first deployment. So now you're going back, 2 or 3 times. I would imagine that the number of experienced or pre-combat experienced individuals increased significantly. Did that tend to kind of help or hinder? Because I know you were just talking about you get multiple deployments under your belt and you get a little bit of complacent, but now you've got some people that have actually had some real-time experience. So what's kind of that dynamic between those 2 deployments, given the relationship between experience?
That's a great question. I guess that would depend on a number of factors. Some of that is if those are the same guys, like you and I, when we went, we took a band of guys. If I would have had that same band of guys, I would have known, how your truck reacted, whether it was Sterling's truck, whether it was whoever's truck. I know how you typically reacted in engagement and contact, but you get people rotating in and rotating out that were in 1st ID, that were 4th ID, 10th Mountain, and sometimes it shouldn't be this way, but their tactics are very different, whether they're in one set of cav or they're in infantry or they're heavy mech. So you have to redefine. It's like taking somebody to teach them how you want them to shoot a gun. You have to reteach them. And sometimes that's the hardest level to do. For some fits, mountain operations, urban operations, it's much easier. It's much easier because that's standard doctrine across the Army. But when you start talking about taking artillerymen and putting them in Humvees, even if they've deployed 2 or 3 times, now they're dragoons and they don't function well. So it's kind of a loaded question. I'm not trying to dance around it.
Yeah.
For the most part, they fit well. But where we are in artillery, you could be in Alaska last year on a 105 light, and this year you're at Fort Hood on a 155 heavy, and it's very different tactics. And when that guy in Alaska was probably there, he was probably light with it, with a weapon or maybe in a Humvee or whatever subset of what system they had. And now he might be on a towed or self-propelled system, whether that's a towed howitzer with 82nd or 101 or a self-propelled or one of the heavier divisions.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And you were the FSNCO there during that second deployment?
I was, the Brigade Fire Support NCO.
And, I mean, big difference in terms of tasks and responsibilities from when we were there.
Yeah.
You probably had more fun coming out on the route with us. I don't know. What's your take on that?
I'll tell you, when you and I were out on the route, sometimes we used to talk about this, you and I, back in theater. If you remember, we would have 90% of our time would be boredom, racetracking around in our Humvees, super cooking because they didn't initially have air conditioners, and it's 100+ degrees outside. Plus, you throw your body armor on, your uniform, all that ammunition, sitting there by all the computers and the radios, and you're just literally frying. If you remember, some guys were using IVs inside their trucks just to stay hydrated. And so you had 90% of your time of boredom and heat, and then you had that intense 5-6% where you're in engagement, and you would come back and you would literally be shaking, coming down from the adrenaline rush, and then 4% of that afterwards was paperwork or, talking to the commander about what happened. In the talk at the brigade level, if you're getting shot at, Todd, you got shot at all the time, it's almost like your vehicle's getting shot at, so you ramp up. But it's not quite as personal. If you hear gunfire in your neighborhood, you're concerned. But if there's gunfire hitting your house, it's a whole different level of adrenaline. So it probably was, majority of the time, much funner to be out on the route because I got to see different things, and it wasn't like Bueller every day is the same day. But there were a lot of huge learning lessons in the talk. We had to learn that if a UAV flies and they're looking for a heat signature on a thermal, and it's 98 degrees and there's a person that you're looking for, that person just becomes a ghost on a thermal camera. And I mean, these are the little things that sound like common sense, and you'd be surprised how many times when you switch over to thermals that someone will blend into the terrain and they become a ghost, or you're shooting artillery and you have to yell stop because you see somebody in a civilian car coming up. So it was very different subset. I went from having, I think, 20 of you guys that were with me to having like 110 guys, and the pressure is much more intense, to be honest. And I worked a lot longer days.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I got on my site, changeyourpov.com, I've got a section on there for stories, and I recorded some small, 10-15 minute little jobbies of just some memories that I have from that time, and I don't know if you've had a chance to watch or listen to any of those, but I encourage you to do so because you're in a lot of them.
Is there one in there about getting some bread and some sheep and you stepping into a manhole cover?
Yes, as a matter of fact, there is, and the title of that one is called Shit Sandwich.
It was a shit sandwich. There should be one in there about Herbst coming down from the truck with mud all over his face, and we said, it hasn't rained in forever. What do you think that is?
Oh, God. So I want to get into our RWB, but before that, I would really like, for my own personal gratification and entertainment, if you could share with me a story of our time in Iraq. What sticks out in your mind? I mean, there's 1,000 different stories that pop through my head, but just what's one that kind of you think back on and you either think about it for whatever reason, or it's funny, or just whatever. Just give me a good story.
I think one of the stories I remember is we were outside of Sadr City, and you were out of the truck, and we saw dirt kicking up around in the ground, and we thought it was wasp, and we're like, what the hell is that? And you said, I think they're firing at us. And you were getting fired at. They were firing all around you. They didn't hit you. And it took us literally about 30 seconds to realize that someone was shooting at you. And I don't think the adrenaline ever raised. It was like, oh, snap, we need to go. The second one is when we went down to Selma Park. And we were doing show of force. And you drove your truck into that field. And it hadn't rained in forever, brother. And your truck, not for the first time, by the way, got buried in a wet field of, I don't want to say what it was. And it literally got buried to the bumper, and you guys are waiting in it, trying to get a tow hook to it and pull it out.
You remember all those stupid-ass kids all around us wouldn't leave us alone?
Yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah. So that story wasn't there yet, but that was, remember when First Sergeant killed that dog in that compound we were in?
Yeah, I remember that became a huge issue later. He got sent away for a little while and had to be the acting first sergeant for a while because of that with Captain Wazinski.
Oh, once we got back?
Yeah. No, it was when they said that he had went on leave, but he didn't go on leave. They just temporarily relieved him while they investigated it, and they sent him away.
Was that while we were there?
Yeah.
Oh, 'cause I remember my section had to drive him to the green zone like a couple of times a week to get to go to, I think it was counseling or
anger management.
Anger management, that's what it was. Yeah, I mean, I didn't mind going to the green zone and hitting up the PXs and whatever while we were there, but it just something didn't sit right with me when I had to risk myself and the lives of my guys to drive this crazy guy, all the way to the green zone so he can attend anger management classes.
Were you there when we drove to the green zone and that Humvee had just gotten hit before we went down the route on Senators or somewhere, and the engine block was laying halfway up that bridge?
Yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah.
Got hit by a platter charge or whatever, and I remember that engine block laying up about 25 feet on that bridge, and I'd never seen anything like it.
Yeah. Yeah, and we were, I don't know if it was with you or with Mault or Han when we were coming back on route. I think it was Irish, wasn't that the road that we came? So it was on route Irish coming back from BIOP, dropping somebody off for R&R, and there was this kid. He must have been like 7, 8 years old, like in this firing position with this great big RPG on his shoulder, and we were traversing our 50 cals around on him to try to engage him, and whatever, I think he just saw us spinning on him, and he got spooked, and he took off and ran into some house. We saw which house he went into, and I called back. It was with Han. I asked permission to engage, and for whatever reason, we also were coming back with a fourth truck. I think it was a replacement 114 that we're bringing back. So we had some unexperienced individuals with us in that fourth truck. So I think Han made the smart call and try not to, surround that house and engage it, because the guys that we were with wouldn't have known what to do or how to stack or how to, pull security or anything. So yeah, just a lot of crazy little things happen like that. And, I talked to a lot of people that have had multiple deployments, and everyone says the same thing. One thing is true, and that is no two deployments are alike. They're not the same. Good, bad, ugly, indifferent, whatever, but they're just not the same. Different missions, different ROEs, different locations, different everything. So that was your second deployment. Your third, it was a totally different role, wasn't it? You were talking about more of an intelligence role.
I did from Desert Storm to.
Oh, that was your first one.
That was my first one. I did Desert Storm, and so I did 0405 with Cab, and I did 0608 with Cab, and then I did between that I did Kuwait Udari Desert deployment, and I did a Saudi Arabia Kuwait deployment.
So you did what, 20 years and retired?
22. Mm-hmm.
22 years. So a lot of guys that I talk to about that transition period out of the military, it's different when you've got 4 years versus say 10 years, and then even more so different when now you're talking, 2 decades. So describe for us kind of that transition out of the military. Did it go the way you thought it would? Was it easy? Was it difficult? Like, what was that like?
I'll tell you, when people come out of prison and they talk about they're institutionalized, I can completely understand what they're talking about, because for us in the military, good or bad, however your experience was, if you served 2 years, if you served 30 years, we all had the same uniforms, so we knew what we were wearing every day. We all had the same specifics. So we had a job set. Typically, if we weren't in combat, we knew what we were doing. If you were a single guy, you had a barracks room to live in, and you had somewhere to eat, medical, and dental. Everything was provided for you. If you were married, you lived on post. Typically, they gave you barracks. At the time, they were pretty decent quarters on Fort Hood, or depending on where you went to, better or worse. And so everything was provided for you. It was pretty much a subset. When you get out, I wasn't nervous about getting out until literally probably 4 months before I got out. I thought I had a plan, had everything set, I had everything saved. They were telling me they were going to deploy me again at 22. I had put my paperwork in, and they said, you have to go again. We're going to stop loss you. And I said, you're not going to stop loss me. I've done more than my fair share of time and my fair share of rotations. And my wife was like, no, you don't need to go again. You've already done enough. You've done your time. You've done the 20 that they asked you to do. So the sergeant major, the new brigade sergeant major that replaced Biggie, he said, your job is special. I'm gonna tell the CG that you absolutely need to go. So I had the stress of getting out, thinking about the civilian sector, with them hanging over me that they were going to take me back to Iraq again. So I told them that I would show up butt naked with my helmet on, and I would board the plane that way, and I'd have a news crew there. So I guess they took me serious. They finally let me retire. But I mean, it's horrible that you have to get to this point in time.
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to shirk my duty. I'd done every deployment that they'd asked. So with that said, when I started getting out, the Army did a good job. The problem that we have in the military, in my opinion, again, I'm going to put my air quotes up, in my opinion, is the military doesn't transition you well if you've done 4 years, 10 years, 22 years in, with the VA and what your needs should be, what you should look at, your medical, physical. When you or I were in and we ran PT and we had all those soldiers, if we woke up and our leg hurt, our knee was swollen, our foot was swollen, we never went to sick call because we had to lead soldiers. We had to. There wasn't you can't, you should go to sick call, you have a headache. We had to move forward. So your medical file is typically very thin. My medical file at 22 years was thinner than privates I had as a drill sergeant at Fort Benning were after 9 weeks. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah.
So you get out and the VA says, well, this isn't service connected, that isn't service connected. I would caution anybody who's still in listening to your podcast to make sure that if you have a backache, you have a headache, you have stomach issues, that you go get those put into your medical records so that you cover yourself for later. Excuse me. If it becomes something, I'll give you one. And I'm the Veteran Outreach Director for the city of Austin, which is a huge area. It's the second largest state capital in the nation right now. Only Phoenix, Arizona is bigger. If you get a TBI rating from taking an IED, that's a traumatic brain injury, basically from a blast from an IED. The VA can give you a rating for TBI and say that the migraines associated with it aren't work or military related. I don't know how they don't go hand in hand, but I just put a study on my Facebook site that shows how they're trying to cover this up. So those are some of the things. Now to get back, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I know that you and I went through that pretty catastrophic IED that blew up Captain Wazinski and Fowler, and you were pretty close to that and took a pretty good concussion blast from that. Mm-hmm. Were you able to get any type of TBI related anything from any of your injuries?
I got a TBI rating. I had put in for a Purple Heart later because if you remember, we had to Charlie Mike. We had a continued mission. Leo Wazinski, who was still in the service. And I just had an email with him the other day. Great guy, by the way. Probably one of the hardest dudes I've ever met in my life. I like to say hard as woodpecker lips. He got blown up, as you know, when you did the Dukes of Hazzard with your Humvee over the berm and came in. I was on the ground. It literally picked me up and threw me, my head over my legs over my head. It threw me back, and then I always tell that it was the most scared I've ever been in my life. Do I go into the cloud to see if they're pieces, or do I go backwards toward my truck? And that was my moment where I moved forward, but I can't say I wasn't scared, and I didn't doubt myself for a minute. So I moved forward. And so I tried to get a Purple Heart later for cuts and everything that I had, and the Army said that there wasn't enough. The VA gave me a 10% TBI rating. I've had headaches since then. I I think about a day and a half or 2 days that I don't remember after the incident at all. It's just a block of time. It's blank. So I probably suffered a concussion. But it's one of those things, if you don't have it in your medical record because you had to continue your mission and you don't stop for that 10 minutes to have a medic put it in there, the VA or the Army is going to say, oh, we're not sure that this ever happened. Even if you have it on an NCOER or sworn statements from your soldiers later, it really is it's translucent to them. They don't see it that way.
Yeah, and so I know you said you started transitioning about 4 months out. Was 4 months enough time, do you think, or would you recommend more if they had it?
I would tell you that if your unit will give you six months to a year to start ACAPing, to start redefining your resume skills, to redefine what you're looking for. It's really hard when you get out to turn a resume into, I pulled a trigger, I got on a radio and called boom boom, and it's real hard for these things, and a lot of people don't understand how to articulate a resume for the job that they want. They always put down the job that they had, and with the military and looking for a civilian job, it's almost impossible to get those jobs when you don't understand how to transition acronyms and lingo and what you did. So there are a whole bunch of sites out there for people to get help, and I think that you were doing some of that also, helping veterans.
Yeah.
I will tell you the biggest thing that you have to do is get somebody that was a veteran to read your resume and say, dude, you got too much military lingo in here. If you're trying to get a job at Dell as a computer programmer, they're not going to understand I was a basic infantry squad leader and I had 15. They're not going to understand it.
Right. Yeah, and that's exactly why I started Change Your POV to begin with, is because it took me, the better part of 10 years after I got out to get my education, to work in corporate America, to go through civilian interviews, actually being the interviewer, and speaking with veterans coming out, before I realized that there's a huge disconnect, like you said, in terms of you get out, you've got all kinds of experience. You really do have, I don't care if you're, an 11 Bravo infantry, in the Army. There are things that you've done and experiences that you've had that are marketable in the civilian sector if you knew how to communicate that and translate that from your experience to something that, somebody at Dell or another corporate company is looking for a position to fill. So it's encouraging to hear that even the seasoned veterans getting out after 20 plus years also find it challenging. A lot of people think that, the senior non-commissioned officers, do their 20, 25, 30 years, they get out and everything's handed to them on a silver platter, and everything's easy for them. Granted, you've got some type of a pension. I can't imagine it would be a whole hell of a lot, but granted there's that, but you've got continued benefits in terms of, retirement benefits and things like that that I didn't get when I got out after 10 years, but still, those little things, although they're nice, they don't set you up for the rest of your life, right? It's not like we're dying these days at 50, hopefully not anyway. We're not dying at 50, 60 years old. Hopefully we're living to the ripe old age of, 80, 90 plus years. So, you've got a full life ahead of you, you know what I mean? And was your wife in at the time you got out, or did you guys get out together?
My wife got out before I did, and she was military intelligence. She did 5 years. And by the way, we'll talk offline because she said she'd be happy to give you a female veteran's perspective. She did 2 times.
Nice, very cool. Yeah.
So she got out before I did, and so for a while, and a little bit of backdrop, I was married previously, had 3 kids. So you think that retirement is great, but when you're paying child support for 3 kids to somebody else, then you get out and you watch your funds about to dry out, and your wife hasn't found a job yet because she's got out of the military, and she's on unemployment because she's searching and trying to get her skill set, just like you were talking about. There's some fear factor that goes through you because you've been institutionalized for so long that you don't understand. I think the Army is doing better with transitioning AER, different events, inside the out processing center. The problem is, and the reality is, when you get on the VA site and say all these companies are hiring veterans, Walmart's hiring 250,000 veterans in the next 10 years, the reality is, and I just saw a story today, that the VA, even hiring veterans, these are the lowest of the lowest paying jobs. Typically, when we get out at 10 years or 20 years, we're in our 30s with children, married, or we're in our 40s, in my case, children, payments, married. And so you have to come in and get a fairly decent job to start. You can't start out, I don't know what the minimum wage is where you live, but here the Dairy Queens are hiring at like $12 or $13 an hour. So, that's not cost of living reasonable for me, but for an 18-year-old, I've seen the whole thing on the internet, but for an 18-year-old, that might be cost of living effective. So you're trying to do something, maybe that's go back to school, maybe that's work on your thing. If I could add one caveat, again, to all the veterans that are coming out, you'd be surprised how many sergeant majors and different people I've talked to that transitioned out of the military that never wanted to go to the VA because they felt that it would be a handout to get a rating from the VA, whether that's 10%, whether that's 0% or 100%. And they didn't feel like they were broken enough. And I'll tell you that if you ever had an injury that was work-related in the military, jumping off a track, jumping off a truck, having something dropped on you, hurting yourself during a ruck march, breaking something, then you're owed those benefits. It's just like you would be from workman's comp in the civilian sector. We have to start taking care of our veterans. 22 veterans a day in this country commit suicide. They end their own lives because we're not speaking, we're not helping, we're not, trying to justify their existence. And the system takes years. I've watched my neighbor in Arizona who was a Vietnam vet. He was trying to get his veterans benefits from Agent Orange from Vietnam. And he told me, I'm going to die before the VA ever pays me. And he died last year before the VA ever gave him a rating.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Absolutely. And he had all sorts of issues assigned with Agent Orange. The problem is, just like with TBI and everything now, or Gulf War syndrome, the VA will wait as long as they have to provide a rating on something in the hopes that more of us die off or more of us go away. So
right.
I don't want to badmouth the VA because I don't want them to give me a goose egg on my paperwork. But there's a lot of problems with the system.
Yeah. And I've talked with a lot of people, and it's not necessarily a lot of people blame the VA, but what people don't realize is, the VA it's an organization, it's a government organization, it's federally funded, so there's a lot of red tape involved with a lot of that, and there's really a lot of really good people that work for the VA. The guy that I do my Friday episodes with, Bennett Tanton, he works for the VA, and he's a peer support specialist, and he does everything he can to get out there and helps veterans. So it's not necessarily people at the VA. It's a lot of that bureaucracy and red tape that people are struggling against. And it'll get better over time, but you got to consider how many people are getting out of the military all at the same time. And there's just a huge strain. That infrastructure was never set up to support that many veterans with health and injury related type of issues coming out all at the same time. Not only that, but we've been in basically combat or war, call it war, right, for 12. That's the longest period of time that this country's been in combat for. Ever. Yeah, and a lot of people forget about that, right? Granted, there was a lot more people that served in World War II. But the duration of that conflict or that war was much shorter than what we're facing today. How did you get involved with RWB? How did you hear about it, and how did you get involved?
Hey, thanks for asking. Real quick, let me go back to the VA thing. There are 26 million veterans in our country right now. 26 million veterans, and the state of Texas has got 1.78 million of them. So if you're in the state of Texas, by the way, and you're looking for a good organization to join, RWB is that organization to join because we have outreach all over the place. So I was at a local event here in Georgetown, Texas, and they had a booth set up, and it said Team Red, White, and Blue, supporting Americans veterans. And it's not just veterans, it's civilians. It's a lot of things. And so I started talking to the woman that was running the booth, and she said, here in Georgetown, we have a group that meets at least once a week, and we do something called a crawl, walk, run. So we all meet up in the park. If you're a jogger, there's a group that'll go jog. If you're a bike rider, there's a group that'll go bike ride. If you're just a walker and you want to socialize, if you have a 5 or a 4-year-old and you want to, sit and talk to other people, then you could do so. In our group, just our group, the woman who heads it is a woman named Elizabeth. She's a lawyer for JG on Fort Hood. She's Army reservist. So she comes out unless she's on drill. And if you have any issues with anything in the law, she's a tax lawyer, so she could talk about taxation and different things on property taxes. We've got chiropractors. We've got doctors. We've got from World War II to current retirees. I joined the American Legion. I joined the VFW. I looked for the esprit de corps of bonding with brothers. And when I would go to these organizations, especially the VFW, I would see they were, and for all of you that are out there that are in the VFW, and if it works for you, please go for it. I just saw that they were stuck, it seemed like, in Vietnam. I would go in there, I would see the Vietnam hats. I would see people that were much older than me in my mid-40s all talking about issues that they had from Vietnam, sitting around drinking and smoking. Well, that's great, and it's conducive if you are an alcoholic. And I mean, every one of us that's got, an issue that's been a veteran has probably had their issue with the bottle, or a lot of us had their issue with the bottle. So I don't want to go down that route. American Legion doesn't have a charter membership here. So I was looking for a group to support and get with. And this group has been phenomenal. I'll tell you, with the VFW and the American Legion, you pay a membership every year. Whether you go to any of their events or not, you still have to pay a membership unless you're a lifetime membership. RWB is free. We're free. There's no cost associated with joining. Go to the national site, teamrwb.org, and join up and find the group or the area that you're in. And then when you sign up, if you're a veteran, RWB is going to send you a high-speed, cool Nike dry fit shirt for the cost of shipping, $5. It'll have the eagle on it, and it says RWB, and it's just our logo, and then you wear that out when you go to the events. So there's no cost. We have events that are sometimes catered with food or different things. There's no cost for the veterans. So RWB isn't asking for any money from veterans up front. They do this by contributions from major donors. George Bush Jr. is one of our major donors. We have many other donors besides that. And I think I'm correct on George Bush Jr. I read that somewhere, and if I'm not, I apologize to RWB. But you can go on rwb.org and look at it. I just became the Veteran Outreach Director for Austin. And so some of what I do real quick, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, is veterans that don't want to be in large groups. They just want to have a one-on-one. They'll contact me and they'll say, hey, man, I've gained a lot of weight. I haven't done anything but drink or do this or do that. Can we get out and walk? Can we have coffee? Can we talk? I'm having issues. I'm stressing. I need to talk. And I have guys that ride bikes with me now that haven't done any exercise in years, that have ballooned up and they're not happy with where they're at, and their mental picture of themselves. And we're riding 50, 60, 70 miles a week if we can. The weather, we have great weather here compared to you guys, so we get out and we ride, and I donate as much of my time as I can with them. I'm about to join a new group here in the city of Austin. We have a group of in the justice system that gets vets if they're going to court for nonviolent crimes, and we try to get them before they get a record, and we offer them a plan if they've had a DUI or whatever else, how to get help, how to get to a support system, and then after they accomplish everything, they go back before a military judge, it's a civilian or retired, and they don't get anything on their record. It's cleaned up. So, there's a whole bunch of these courts that are popping up for veterans. All I can say is that if you have the time to donate 5, 10, 15 hours a month, please do so. If you just want to go out and walk with vets and you're a civilian and you listen to this podcast, RWB could use anything or anybody that wants to go out. We have half marathons and full marathons where all we need is somebody to be a supporter, hand out a bottle of water. So if you can give an hour of your time to support that, that'd be great, and veterans would appreciate that.
So you said that this is it's not just in Texas, right? This is all over
We're in England also. So
wow.
Yeah, we're going wherever there's military bases. We're trying to push out the footprint. The guy that started it, I'll let you read about him, but he's basically a West Point grad that did time, and then he got out and he was looking for that support system, that camaraderie, and he noticed that everything, from what I remember, everything wasn't about bonding. It was more about different venues that I've mentioned before. And so he wanted to get people together. This guy was a runner. When RWB started, it was a running group. right? We've transitioned to a physical and social group. And so with that social group, I mean, my wife will meet with other veterans and other civilian members of RWB, and once a week they go have coffee, or maybe they'll have a girls' day where they do something else. But I mean, our female veterans are less than, I think, 8% of the population of veterans in this country. Anyway, it's a very small sect.
Yeah. And for those of you that have just joined on Periscope, what we're talking about is I'm on a podcast live with Sergeant First Class Michael Mault, my platoon sergeant, when we went to Iraq, and he's found a great organization called RWB that stands for redwhiteandblue.org, and he's part of a chapter down in Austin, Texas, and he's kind of going through what this program can do and does for the veterans. It's a nonprofit 501c3, is that correct?
That's right.
That's very cool. So how long has RWB been kind of in existence now?
They just went over their 5th year. And so the first couple of years, I think they were transitioning in how to work a 501c. And I think over the last 2 years, they've really found their footprint, and they've really started expanding, because I've seen more and more people have started joining. Here in Georgetown, we have a local magazine called Georgetown View, and we were just featured a month and a half ago in their magazine with a big spread about a Team RWB. I know that they have events in DC. I know that if you go on charity miles, if you guys do charity miles, if you're out doing a Tough Mother, Nate, or if you go out and run or bike ride, there's an app on your iPhone or your Android called Charity Miles. And when you sign up for that, there's a whole bunch of organizations and charities that you can give to. So basically, every mile that you run, they'll give 25 cents to whatever organization you deem. And if you bike ride, it's 10 cents every mile. So while you're out doing exercise, why not contribute to your favorite charity? I would just caution you to look at some of those charities. I won't name any. There's one that's really big for veterans that gives a very, very small amount back to veterans. You always see them on T-shirts. You always see them on the news. But I don't want to name them on your podcast and then have litigation against me. Yeah. I just say that they have two. I just say that they have 2 W's in their names, and they give very, very little back to veterans. When their CEO is making $300,000 or $400,000, it's probably not going back to where it needs to go. And RWB isn't the same way. American Legion, AER. I mean, there's a lot of great things out there.
So that's really cool. So you mentioned that app. Was it Charity Miles, you said?
Yeah, it's Charity Miles. You can go on, I use Apple, but you can go on Android and just click on the App Store, put Charity Miles, and they have everything from women's shelters to, I think, the American Red Cross, and Team RWB is on there also. So we've got a whole bunch of things. So if you're out jogging, or if you're out walking or bike riding, why not give you one of your favorite charities, and it doesn't cost you anything.
Right. That's awesome. That's very cool. So what do you do? Just go on and you link up, when you download the app, you link up your information, choose some type of like activity that you're going to do, and then it keeps track of it for you?
Right. So I go on, I sign up on Facebook, so then I hit the app, and then it says indoor walk, indoor bike ride, outdoor walk, outdoor bike ride. I click on it, and then it asks me, what charity do you want to donate to? I click on the charity, and then there's a start button. And once I hit the start button, if I'm walking or jogging, it's 25 cents a mile. And if I'm bike riding, it's 10 cents a mile. So I did 25 miles on my bike today that I rode, and I got $2.50 for my RWB charity, which I was out bike riding anyway.
So how do they do the treadmills?
That'd be an indoor run. There's an indoor run on there. So I don't know what that is. I haven't done a treadmill. But I would imagine that if you're on it, and the motion would show that, I think it's all motion based, because I think the guy that wrote the app is out of Austin here, but I think it's motion based, so that it shows the phone still moving in your pocket. I think it has to be in your pocket. I don't think you can put it on the display screen of your treadmill. Then I think you're fine. Or
like the pedometer or whatever it is that tracks your steps that you take during the day or something like that.
And I know, like mine, I've got my Fitbit hooked into everything. So I mean, it's that. I would just suggest using that for the people that are listening. Why not get back to your organization?
Yeah. So I got a couple more questions here, and we'll wrap it up. But if you had a time machine, and it's weird calling you Michael, by the way.
It's all good.
Huh?
It's all good, man. It's been a long time since I get out.
So if you had a time machine and you can go back at any point in time and have a conversation with your younger self, what point in time would that be, and what would that conversation sound like?
I think I would go back before we went through our 2004-2005 rotation, and I would try to talk about some of the things that we had go wrong. Maybe some armor that we should have probably tried to push harder for to get on trucks, that we wouldn't have lost somebody, and then maybe things that we had changed for soldiers about being Kevlar defilade, things that still reverberate, every day with me. Things.
Yeah.
You always look back and you always said, "Oh God, what if I could have changed this?" Hal Moore said. And if you guys don't know who Hal Moore is, he was the general, and we were soldiers and young ones too. Hal Moore always said, you can never get over the soldiers you lost. You can never do it, no matter how justified it is. You can never go back and feel justified by the loss of one person. And if you can feel justified by the loss of one person, then you've probably become too callous to be doing the job that you're doing anymore.
And it's been like I interviewed Millie the other night, and I told him, I said, it's weird that I've been out of the Army longer than he's been in, and it's just a weird thing. But and he and I talked about the loss of Justin and Drake, and he says he deals with that every single day, and and I told him that I do too, and it's not that I ever wish that I would get over it, because it's not that I wish I'd forget. It's just that, I wish that like you said, I wish that I didn't feel so guilty about it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And
survivor's guilt.
Yeah, it's, what could I have done different? I was a squad leader, you were the platoon sergeant, and it's like, no matter what we did, no matter how hard we tried, no matter what precautions we took, it always felt and always feels like there could have been more. You know what I mean?
I do.
And that's just tough, and that's just something that we just live with for the rest of our life. So this podcast is called Change Your Point of View, which of course is where I got the acronym POV, point of view, or perspective. Some people call it point of perspective. And I ask all my guests basically the same question, because I like to ask a kind of a control question and get different answers. But the question is this: what's one thing in your life that you experienced or came across, you thought one way, and then something happened, a circumstance or an event happened that caused you to think about it from a totally different perspective? What was it, and what did you learn from that experience?
It's a great question, Nate. And I'll tell you, when we were in Iraq, I hated the Iraqis. I can't say that I was there, that I was joyed to be there when we started losing people and had so many people getting injured. Now, with the time away from there, I can understand why some of those people, not the militants, did what they did, but fathers trying to get food and water for their kids, electricity. If I was put in the same position as some of them, I would have done no less than they did. But when you're there and you're kicking a guy out of a taxi stand, he's trying to make a living, but you don't want the IEDs to be in place, but that's where he knows he's going to get a fare. You look back and you say, man, I probably was way too callous. So that for me didn't happen until about 5 years after I transitioned out of the military, where I realized that they weren't all bad people, that there were some really good people there. They were living in a really, really tough time, and I can't fathom living in that same time or place. I mean, I've heard Vietnam veterans talk about they went back to Vietnam so they could understand the people, and they got it after that they went back there. So for me, the transition was 5 years after I'd been out, and I was just out in the garage one day, and I realized, oh my God, as a father, what wouldn't I have done for my child to have electricity? They didn't have electricity. They didn't have running water, but maybe sometimes an hour or 2 hours a day. In the summertime, 115 degrees, they were trying to get electricity for air conditioning for their kid.
Yeah, yep.
So,
yeah, man, I hear you. So where can people find more about you and or more about Red, White, and Blue? I know we got the team RWB.org. Is there anything else or any other site or link that somebody that's listening to this should be aware of?
No, that's the one right there. When you get on there, that's a national link. If you sign up or even want to look at it, it'll dwell you down to your area. You can look in your state or see where your nearest chapter or subset chapter is. There's one here in Austin. There's one at Fort Hood. I mean, just around my area, Houston, Dallas. I mean, they're all over the place in different states. So find out where the nearest one is. here's what I'd suggest. Just go out to a local event, see if you click with those people that are there, and then maybe, I've made some great friends. We've lived in Georgetown for 2 years. We got involved with Team RWB last year, and I've had more social engagements in that last year. My calendar's filled up more than it did the year before. Then if you're looking for me, it's Michael, Mault, and I'm on Facebook. Feel free to get with me, and if you have a direction or if you have a question about Team RWB that we didn't answer on this podcast, please reach out to me, send me a message. As long as it's not hate mail, I'll be happy to get back to you. If you send me some hate mail, you're probably not going to like the response you get back.
That's nice. Very cool. Hey, thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate your time, and I'm definitely going to take you up on your offer and get your wife on here and get a female veteran's perspective. It's a perspective in that she's a female veteran, but it's a totally different perspective because I have not yet talked with anybody that was basically a dual military husband and wife team that basically exited right around the same time, and the different challenges that you guys faced with that. So I would really love to kind of get her take on that and kind of learn more about her because I've never met her before.
Perfect. I think you'll enjoy it because her family came from Russia, and then she was trading stocks, like I said, and then went on to be in military intelligence. So wow. She's got a great story.
That's intense. Very cool. All right. Well, that will do it for this episode of Change Your POV. I am your host, Eddie Lazary. Thanks again to Michael Mault for coming on, sharing his story. Thanks for all of the Periscope viewers that came on sporadically here and there. They kind of popped in 2s and 3s and then bounced. I don't know. They got to get their feet wet. Maybe you scared them off with your story of Iraq's or the explosions or something. I don't know. I don't know if there's a disclaimer I've got to put on these Periscopes in terms of content, but whatever. But anyway, I will put all of the links in the show notes for this episode for Team RWB. And everything else that we discussed.
And if you have any questions again about getting out, please feel free to get with me. I can tell you the little bit that I remember.
Nice, very cool. All right, thanks again, and we gotta touch base and not make it so long next time.
Hey man, when you get down to Texas, you know the deal. You're more than welcome. I'll get you some good 512 Texas pecan beer down here.
Nice, love it. All right, man.
All right, brother.
Thanks a lot.
Yep, bye.
All right, folks, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Michael Mault. I know I did. That guy, awesome guy to work for. Anyone that had the privilege of serving underneath him can attest to that for sure. You can find all of the show notes of everything we talked about in this episode at changeyourpov.com/episode 30. Man, can't believe we're already at episode 30. Never miss an episode. Hit subscribe on your podcast player of choice. We have a lot more great content headed your way. If you want to reach out to me directly, you can email me at eddie@changeyourpov.com. I would absolutely love to hear from you. And also, don't forget, we've got a community for all of you to go and hang out, meet each other, talk, see what's up, what organizations you all are members of. Good information at the closed Facebook group at Change Your POV Squad. That's Change Your POV Squad. Head on over there. It's on Facebook. It is a closed group. All you got to do is request access, and I will get your request. I will send you a 50-page questionnaire and a urinalysis samples, all that's required to join the group. Yeah, I'm just kidding. As long as you're not like crazy nuts. But then again, Bennett's in that group. So I guess Crazy Nuts is accepted. All right. Head on over there. I'd love to see you there. And until next time.
Thanks for listening to Change Your POV podcast with Eddie Lazary. Check out more content by going to changeyourpov.com. And remember, your ability and willingness to change your point of view will open doors of opportunity.